Hey everyone, it's Shay on the mic. We're going beyond politics. Hope you're psyched. Not just policies, not just plans. We're talking dreams, hobbies, and life's other strands. We'll meet the leaders behind the scenes, uncover the stories in between, the laughs, the quirks, the passions they hide, their personal moments, unfiltered and wide. Ready or not, let's get underway. This is Beyond Politics with Shay. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Politics with Shay, where we delve deeper into the lives and personalities of our favorite political leaders. Today, we're joined by Lynda Voltz. Lynda is a state member for Auburn, representing people in parts of the Cumberland and Canterbury-Bankstown region. Lynda is known for her inclusive leadership style and focus on marginalised groups. This style has shaped her political career and her political style. Lynda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's great, and thank you for having me here. It's fantastic.
Pleasure is ours. Let's get straight into the icebreaker challenge. First question, what is one thing that people don't know about you?
Probably that I won the first, when I was in the regular army, there's a soldier that's awarded the Corps trophy, and women weren't allowed into what were called field force or frontline corps. When they were allowed in, I joined, and I won the first Field Force Corps trophy in the Australian Regular Army that a woman's ever won. So that's probably something most people
That's
don't
huge.
know.
That's absolutely huge. Do you still have that trophy?
Yeah. I've got it hidden away somewhere.
Definitely take that out of the wherever it's hidden and start showing it off. Thanks for sharing. Okay, more focus on your personality now. What is one common compliment that you receive all the time?
A common compliment. Oh, well, one of the ones which always surprises me is people go, "I didn't know you were that old," right? So I'm very lucky on that. On my personality, people probably compliment me on actually being more grassroots. I tend to I'm more tactile. I like to be out there doing things with people rather than, sitting back and writing something. It's better to be out there and mucking in, basically. And I think people appreciate that.
And that comes through your engagement with the people in your area for sure, and that focus. Okay, moving on to the last icebreaker question. If there was one feature that you could introduce to a smartphone, iPhone, Android, whatever smartphone that you use, what would that be? Now, this usually gives me an insight into your day-to-day struggles, personal, professional.
Right, okay, well, one of the things with smartphones is just a universal system. My car, because, you have, the Apple Play on the car, and every time the Parliament changes how something is done, like our calendars, it changes the interface with the car. So if we could have a universal interface where I could actually see my diary or have it coming up. I know it sounds a dumb thing, but just that inability to know where you're going from 1 minute to the next, because I'm in my car most of the time driving around. I'm not necessarily sitting in front of a computer, and my car essentially becomes a computer.
Very tactical and technical solution. A good insight into the day-to-day struggles as well, travelling, Parliament. So thank you for sharing. Moving on to your personal story, you've shared with us some of that already, your military career, obviously growing up in Sydney's West. Share with us a little bit more about your personal story and your childhood.
So I grew up in Birong, which many people here will know very well, and I was born in and grew up in the same house my mother was born and grew up in. So we were one of the first houses in Birong on Wentworth Street, which was originally called Elizabeth Street, and it was all bush back then. So Birong was a very different place then to what it is now, but a lot of the fundamentals aren't very different. They were very, very tough suburbs. This is the post Second World War and Korean War. There were a lot of returned soldiers that suffered a lot. Most houses had garages with little kitchens in them because they would not have money to build houses. They'd build a garage first, put a kitchen in it, and they'd live there until they could build a house. And most houses were constructed by the people. So So it was a very different place to what it is now.
Interesting insight into the local area, born and raised, shifting the focus now to that motivation that inspired a career in politics. What could you share with us? What was that personal story that inspired the career into a political life?
So my grandfather had been in the party. He'd actually been a founding member of Birrong branch of the Labor Party. My grandfather was actually Aboriginal. His mother and the children were sent to an Aboriginal reserve or mission during the First World War when his father, who was white, went off to the First World War. So his life was very shaped around what happened in the First World War and what happened to them on the mission. And there was always a stigma attached, of course, to being, having an Aboriginal mother. So that changed things. But essentially, I am a child of my times. I lived through the post-Vietnam protest movement, but more importantly, the 70s when we had high unemployment. There was a lot of rioting and unrest, particularly across Britain and places, but also in Australia.
Thank you for sharing that very personal and insightful view into your childhood and your story. What is one passion that you hold or a talent that you have that would surprise people if they knew about you?
I'm not sure it'll surprise everybody because a lot of people have been fed by me, but I just love cooking. I really love to cook, and I find it relaxing. I find it creative. It's just something that when I'm doing it, it can be very relaxing.
I'm going to ask you a question. It's not your signature dish, but what was the first dish that you learnt how to cook?
Oh, well, that's actually very difficult because my mother worked and my father worked, and I was cooking the family meals from about the age of 11. So the only thing I can tell you is that when I started at Birrong Girls High, it was a home science school, and we had to do cooking classes. And the first class, they had us learning how to boil water. Well, I'd been cooking family dinners. I really didn't need to know how to boil water.
Cooking, definitely a creative outlet and a change of pace from your day-to-day. Moving into our policy segment. Today we're going to be focusing on Australia's national identity and social story. How each group within Australia sees itself and how we talk about each other. In your view, does Australia's current national identity and social story, does it reflect its growing diversity?
Probably not. There is a reality about once we got rid of the White Australia policy in Australia post-Second World War, where our real wealth was being built and huge immigration coming in to support that and underpin that part of Australia, that there was a kind of freedom about Australia, particularly in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where a lot of political discussion could happen, where there was a lot of thought, where Australia progressed, particularly under the Hawke government, progressed quite a long way. What we're seeing now is this movement where freedom of expression is actually repressed, and it's very difficult for people to put an opinion that necessarily is their own. And you see this around the debate with Palestine, where you have people like Peter Layla, the cricket journalist, Latif at the ABC, where simply reporting facts on somewhere like Palestine is something that they're actually losing jobs over. Now, that's not the Australia we live in. People are entitled to put their view and to put their view freely. And there are always two sides to a story, always two sides. And an Australia that doesn't allow two sides to be heard is a very dangerous place.
It's a very interesting point that you bring up. Obviously, a couple of more notable stories in the past few months has put some further pressure on this conversation, whether or not Australia's identity and social story is reflective of its people and its growing diversity.
Yeah.
In your opinion, currently as it stands now, Australia's social story, does it foster unity among people or divide people based on their backgrounds?
Well, I think this is where it becomes very dangerous, right? Because if a section of your community feels that they are not being heard, or that they're being partitioned off, then you have a huge problem. Again, we saw this with the Cronulla riots, where the reaction to the Cronulla riots, where young people were being stopped in the street all the time, stopped by police. In fact, My husband, who's Greek, looked Arabic, and he was stopped every single night. And it got to the point where he was quite angry and quite upset about it, right? And if that's happening to him, it's happening to everybody.
Obviously, a darker period in Australia's history. If we can bring the focus back to obviously the discussion today and what's going on, the bubbling tensions between different groups within Australia, what role do you believe the media plays in representing these discussions, and how could their influence better support discussion as opposed to fueling these tensions?
Well, again, that's where reporting has to be balanced. There has to be an ability from a journalist to say, here's what has happened here. Here's the people that feel threatened or have a problem with it. But here's the other side of the story as well. Okay, because without a balance in reporting, and you can see it across particularly the tabloid newspapers in particular, if you're not getting the information and only one view is being put forward, it's not reporting. Basically, a reporter should deal with facts, and it's problematic now that we have papers that will, quite often I see stories and there's actually nothing to them.
An interesting discussion that will obviously continue throughout and focus on this year, the further disconnect from that national identity. How do you think that certain groups in Australia feel or will feel if they continue to feel this disconnect from the national identity? What might this look like for them in terms of their civic participation?
Yeah, and herein lies the problem, and you've just seen it in council elections. There was a 30% informal vote. Now, we do tend to have high informal votes anyway, but that was a protest vote, and it's not that they were voting for someone else, they just weren't voting. They were going in there, taking their ballot paper and putting it straight into the thing. Now, that's hugely problematic because you're ending up with elected officials that don't represent the community and don't represent the concerns that section of the community has because of that hugely high informal votes. Now, in a liberal democracy, small L liberal that is, as opposed to liberal as in the party, in a liberal democracy, over time you see this kind of assimilation into the whole process. When people came from Palestine and the Lebanon following the civil war to Birron Girls High and places like that, we couldn't get them to play sport. The girls I was there with, all those things. Within 20 years, I was playing soccer with their daughters on the soccer fields and they were swimming in the swimming pools. That's what a liberal democracy brings to people, and that's why Australia has been so successful. So if you separate that voting process and have people that have a complete disconnected from democracy and that way, then what does that mean for that process that we have seen as being so successful?
How do you think future Australians can feel more connected to Australia's evolving narrative?
Well, the good news is that education's making all the difference in the world. Everywhere I go, you're running into young people whose parents really didn't have opportunity, and they're doctors and scientists. They're doing the research that will answer the big questions that politicians never can. And as they progress through, they are bringing to their communities a great part of the Australia and that diversity. So education is it's why we put so much focus on education. It is the one place you invest $1 into education, you're going to get $400 return on it.
Thank you, Lynda. A very timely and an important discussion to have. Moving on now to one of my favourite parts of this show, getting to know you on a personal level. If we can move on to the rapid fire segment.
Sure, let's go.
Let's go?
Yeah,
okay.
let's go.
Starting with your favourite film.
Shawshank Redemption.
Why?
It's just a great story about someone overcoming injustice, and it's a gripping story. Yes, it's a great story.
Now, favourite song?
White Riot by The Clash. Again, it's about the Notting Hill riots. It's sometimes misinterpreted, but you know, they were anti-fascist, anti-racism, anti-violence. The Clash, if you haven't ever listened to them, you should.
Does it evoke a personal memory or a story that you'd like to share?
Yeah, it kind of does, and it's a generational one for me, and it probably says more about my politics than anything else. People forget the Brixton riots and what was happening. People of colour were being murdered. There was this National Front white supremacist group going around killing people, and the police could never arrest them, but the minute there were any riots, people of colour were being arrested in huge numbers. And this Notting Hill riot that some members of the Clash were at, and which the song comes from, is where they actually pushed back, and their view was, you know, the coloured guys have got a real argument to make here, and we should be backing them in.
You could see that both your favourite film and song come quite strongly in terms of shaping your childhood and obviously your political influences and ideology. Moving on to your favourite meal.
Well, I'm probably, I know it sounds weird, but oysters, right? I have about 8 shucking
It's
knives.
decisive. It's a decisive one. You either hate them or you love them.
I love them. I've got 8 shucking knives. I always freshly shuck my oysters. I just, I'll go to towns
Chef
just for
too.
I'll just go to towns for the oysters, yeah.
Okay, on that note then, what is one favourite restaurant or cafe?
Well, the place I love to duck into when I get to the Auburn kebab shop, I know it sounds weird, but if you go and get the double lamb, it's just like double lamb, it's brilliant. No, it's worth going to.
Need to know, what's the sauce? What's the sauce you smear all over that?
Well, it comes with the yogurty chili one. It's Turkish, right? It's a Turkish kebab shop, and they have rice and they put lots of fresh bread in, and coming from a family where most of them are Greek, and I have to have a whole loaf of bread at every meal, right? Because you can't eat apparently unless there's lots of bread. So
the famous gyros versus the kebab challenge. So
gyros,
that
they say kebab, I say souvlaki. We get into this argument all the time, yeah.
Okay, and what is the last book that you've read?
I'm actually reading a book called She Was a Nymphomaniac. It sounds weird. What it is it's written by a woman historian who's gone back and looked at the women in the Roman Empire from about Augustus through to Nero and how they were portrayed. And Robert Hughes alludes to this in his History of Rome about Cleopatra, that they were obviously portrayed as these women that were having affairs and wanton and would be sex workers, all like completely untrue, and goes back and unmasks that and looks behind the people that write those kind of histories and why they're writing them.
See that inquisitive mind coming through, and obviously a lot of passion in terms of standing up for people and those that really need to have their voice heard. Could definitely see that come through, and what a privilege it is for us to hear about your personal story and your childhood. Lynda, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give Lynda the space to share with you how best to contact her following this episode, but please like and share this episode with your networks. And from everyone here at the Oz Arab Media Studio, thank you for joining us again. Lynda, over to you.
Thank you. So if you've got a problem, ring us. That's the best way to get through, 9737 8822, open 9 to 5 every weekday. If you need us on a weekend, we'll always come in and do meetings with you there. Otherwise, drop us an email at auburn@parliament.nsw.gov.au.